in the real estate industry. And it is a worldwide organization with about 43,000 members. The membership has local district councils, and Julie Medley is our executive director. And actually the chair of our district council, Scott McLaren, is one of our panelists tonight. ULI is routinely brought in by local governments to do kind of a high level, quick analysis of a development challenge or opportunity, and often both, that the municipality has recognized. And we're asked to evaluate specific areas, which we'll review with you as soon as Julie gets our PowerPoint up. And let me tell you a little bit about our panelists. All of us are members of ULI. We are all volunteers. We have professionals in a wide range of disciplines. I will start, and if the faces don't move around, I've got Scott McLaren, who is president of Styles, a regional, wonderful local development company. And Scott, as I said, is also our chair of our district council. Juan Muyerat, who I may or may not have said his name correctly. We were working on that this afternoon. Juan is a land planner and design professional who really focuses a great deal on urban redevelopment opportunities. Our next member of our panel is Alfonso Costa. Alfonso has recently been working at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and he's come into the private sector working with the Falcone Group, heading up their affordable housing and workforce housing group. Eric Liff is a market analyst with Lambert Advisory Services. And there we go. We may have a presentation. There we go. You can go right to our panel. There we go. As I said, Eric is our market analyst. Aliyah Awad is a transportation planning and engineer who will bring that perspective. And Darwin is our intern. Go back once. Who did I miss? Julie, go back one slide, please. I think, and Al Battle. Al is a dear friend and someone who has helped shepherd the city of Fort Lauderdale through numerous redevelopment and development opportunities over the past, I guess it's like 16 years, he was saying he's been with the city. So you've got a broad range of professional, of talent, people who have South Florida ties, but really most of us are pretty fresh to looking at the particular study area, and that was part of the reason we were brought in, to be fresh eyes. And Julie, could you go to the next slide, please? Next slide. The corridor is the area outlined in green, basically stretching from just north of Hillsborough Boulevard to Sample Road, the west side of Dixie Highway. It includes the commercial corridor as well as the Allwood Homes neighborhood. Next slide. So what were we brought here to do? The staff had some very specific questions they asked us, and we tried to encapsulate those questions into a series of statements. So first of all, we were trying to identify factors that are discouraging revitalization and redevelopment in the area. Then we were asked to recommend measures to overcome any obstacles to revitalization, to identify a viable mix of uses that would encourage new capital investment and public-private partnerships, recommend techniques to address concerns about the neighborhood compatibility, given the adjacency of this corridor to well-established residential communities, and to recommend where and how community spaces could be improved, created to enhance the study area and be part of the solution to revitalizing this area. Next slide, please. Interestingly, yesterday, our panel spent part of the afternoon with Chris and other members of her staff familiarizing ourselves. You can't know the district till you drive it and you walk it and you get a feel for what's really going on. Google Earth only gives you so much of perspective. The interesting thing was that virtually all of our panelists walked away with the same impression, which is this is a very long corridor. It's 3.5 miles, and that it is comprised of a series of character areas and nodes. And each of those character areas and nodes relate differently. Oh, don't change yet. They relate differently to the adjacent neighborhoods and to the rest of the city. And they relate in different ways. Now you can go to the next slide. So in terms of this slide, let me hand off to Juan. If you would take over for the moment, and then we'll proceed.
Sounds great. Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, everybody. Quite a pleasure to be working on this very interesting project. As Debbie mentioned, the first thing that we realized is that this is a very diverse, very different type of project, because the boundaries seem to have been drawn in a way that we had to subdivide it. And mainly because there's the character areas that Debbie mentioned are quite clear. We've got 4 residential neighborhoods that we need that are related to the corridor. The corridor itself, which has very unique frontage onto Dixie, and then the nodes. And the nodes are those areas that essentially look at the intersection between Dixie and those east-west connectors. And those are quite different from the neighborhoods, and they're quite different from the corridor itself. Can we go to the next slide, please? So first, we looked at the neighborhoods, and you'll notice that we've extended our study area in a way. And it's because the neighborhoods relate to the corridor, and the corridor relates to the neighborhood. Again, very differently from College Park and Allwood Homes to Carver and Park Ridge. And forgive us if we didn't get the names correctly. We didn't quite get a clear identity of the neighborhoods. Number 1, for instance, is 2 neighborhoods put in one. Number 2, it's very clearly defined, which is Carver Heights. And then to the south, it's just been called at this time South Dixie. But we believe that there is something there that we need to study a little further. Can we go to the next slide, please? And then we have the nodes, and as I noted, the nodes that we have been looking at are the one that we feel has a lot of potential, which is the Hillsborough node to the north, and then the other 3, which are the termination, or I guess where 10th Street and 48th Street and Sample Road as well terminate on the corridor. And that has, these nodes have a lot of potential for redevelopment with a higher and more intense uses, densities and intensities that would not affect in an adverse way the neighborhoods themselves, and could provide the services that these neighborhoods could use in order to revitalize. Hit next, please. And then again, finally, the corridor, which is the reason for the project. It's a very, very narrow sliver. In some cases, the parcels are very difficult to develop, but it's linear. It has a lot of potential. We have a lot of traffic moving through. So from a commercial standpoint, from an accessibility standpoint, there is a lot of potential too. So we've tried to get our heads around each of these areas and what the potential for these areas are, what the challenges are, which again are not all the same, and essentially try to look at this project, this site, as a sum of the parts. And that's how we've been looking at it. Go to the next slide. Within all the areas, we found really intriguing and very and assets with a lot of potential. Of course, to the north, you've got the parks and the river. You've got a lot of vacant properties, which are both positive and negative. They're negative because they're vacant. They're positive because there's a lot of potential for redevelopment, reinvention, and also help revitalize those communities. We've also got community centers. You've got more parks than any neighborhood in Miami. So kudos to you all for being able to save that open space. They can really become the center of a neighborhood and really help revitalize. So if only we can look at these as community centers and neighborhood centers, I think we've got a real good chance of revitalizing with, and improving people's lives. And then again, finally, the variety of legacy uses that we have are, are already there. The zoning needs to be looked into to make sure that, these uses are the good uses and good residential context sensitive and residential friendly uses can be inserted in there. And schools, obviously, those are great attractions for new families that again would be the way that the neighborhoods would take a step into a better condition. Go to the next slide. I think it's Eric, I believe you're up.
Yep.
Yeah. Hi again. Yeah, Eric Liff. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity. Real quickly, we think it's important to reiterate the fact that there must be a link between physical planning and economic reality. While we didn't do a deep dive into the economics, we do understand that there are economic challenges in and around the study area, including moderate incomes, lower home ownership, elevated unemployment. We also know that economic development in the study area has not kept pace with the rest of the city. And also, we understand that residential and commercial lease rates in the study area are generally below the threshold to support new construction. With that, though, we do understand that there's opportunity. The vast majority of workers in and around the study area live outside of the study area, and that creates an opportunity to capture what we call resident pent-up demand. And at the same time, the vast majority of residents in and around the study area work outside of the area, and that underscores the need to expand job opportunities. So in sum, this is what's driving the need to evaluate the broad range of planning initiatives discussed today. And we'll discuss those a little bit further. And now I'll hand this back to Debbie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So the majority of the rest of the presentation is going to be a series where we're going to identify an obstacle to the redevelopment and then offer some solutions. And we'll go through each of these obstacles in detail and then offer up those solutions. And by the way, we're going to take time at the end of this for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, make a note and we'll put you in the queue to ask a question when we finish the presentation. So these obstacles fall into these various different buckets. I don't need to read them to you. Let me just start with the first one, regulatory obstacles. Next slide, please. We heard a great deal last night, and I saw that Dwayne is back on. And I think, Dwayne, your description of, or maybe it was Chris, I don't remember whose story it was, that the person who wanted to have a retail store on the bottom and an office building on the top couldn't because he was required to have residential. The underlying zoning and the design guidelines that we see that you have are restrictive and unrealistic. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, because Felicia and Sylvia Portier say they can't hear anything. I don't know how to help them. So the existing zoning is problematic from a use and a design standpoint. The entitlement process was clearly not understood by many. Now those can get pretty complicated, and if not, there'd be no need for people like me and Dwayne to shepherd developers through a process. But the community should have some sense of how that all works, and that shouldn't, streamlining it, as we'll get to in a moment, can be a real facilitator for redevelopment. The municipal land use that you have on the entire corridor, with all except for a small piece, is commercial. Commercial used to be a great land use category for this kind of corridor, but as I know, and I think Eric Powers, you're aware of this, to redesignate your corridor from commercial to commerce under the county plan is something that would permit a great deal more flexibility. Next slide, please. So to put a little bit of meat on the solutions, in terms of rewriting a zoning code, if the goal is to create certainty for the development community, understanding for the community at large, for property owners to understand what could really be built on their site, we would recommend going with a form-based code that recognizes the different character areas and nodes that Juan was talking about a moment ago. In terms of creating certainty in entitlement process, permitting in an area where you have a form-based code, in particular, permitting an administrative site plan approval, because you will have done a comprehensive rezoning, then you can have an administrative site plan approval. That would allow, again, a greater level of certainty and transparency in the process. People would know what they could do there. We also believe that incorporating development incentives, such as reduced parking requirements, expedited permitting, density bonuses, all of those would be available to a builder or developer if they provide shared parking. And that'd be shared parking, not just for their own uses, but for the community uses. We saw that there's these huge, vast ownership of some church lots that are used pretty much one day a week. If that parking could be somehow incorporated with a commercial enterprise, which is closed on Sundays, you have the kind of synergy and shared parking that allows for greater development. Increasing landscaping, just making it look better, and incorporating more public open spaces, urban plazas, places for people to pick up a sandwich and sit outside on a gorgeous day like today. Even on the corridor, you create that kind of neighborhood community that we're looking for. One of the other elements, creating a uniform buffer design for commercial development adjacent to residential. I'm going to just throw that out there because Scott in a little while is going to talk about a comparison between what you're currently doing and what could be done in that meeting up point between the residential and the commercial. And as I mentioned earlier, going to a more flexible land use category like commerce along the entire corridor would permit a full range of uses that we're going to talk about a moment later about what uses we think would be appropriate. Next slide, please. Perfect handoff. I think that's now Scott.
That's right. Thank you, Debbie.
Sure.
And thank you, everyone. As one of the developers here on the panel tonight, I'm going to speak to you about our next obstacle to redevelopment, which is the size and configuration of the parcels. And over a quick period of time, as you all know, we were introduced to a wide variation of potential development parcels, whether they're vacant land or potential redevelopment sites. The majority of the parcels are small, many without full or ideal access points, and most in direct adjacency to the neighborhood residential. This particular example we show here shows two small structures. On the left, about a ½ an acre site, on the right, about 0.3 acres, both up against the residential with very little buffering between, if any. Neither have ideal access, as neither one can be accessed coming from the south northbound. And as we'll mention later, what you can't see here is that on both sides of this, you also have DOT retention dry ponds. So there's really no opportunity to grow these small sites. Also, just, not to pile on these two, but as examples, there's no curb cut on the property to the right on Dixie Highway, difficult streets, state-owned to achieve those cuts. And finally, both of these, just as examples, would be nearly impossible to attract a retailer of any size. The access for one is tough, as we discussed, and then the size of these parcels, in order to produce and allow proper circulation and parking, would be very difficult to put much on the site. So on the next slide, I'd like to talk about a few solutions as we talk about the size, the limited access, and the adjacent to the residential as obstacles. And first, focusing on really going out and targeting lower density, smaller flex industrial and or owner occupied buildings, businesses, and or small retail for the corridor. And remember the distinction that one made between the corridor, the nodes, and the residential. So specifically to the corridor, we found this as a really neat example. And I've recalled this particular development for many years. It's been there. These are small sites in and of themselves, but I imagine this was one developer, and you all can correct me, but they came in and provided opportunities for business owners to come in and own their own small business, about 3,000 square foot business, if I measured correctly, about 130 foot in depth, individually about 0.3 acres each. Nicely done, and really attractive product, especially when first built, and fits along a very narrow corridor. On the next slide, we'll talk specifically to those nodes that Juan outlined before. And here is where you have the opportunity to pursue those larger, more traffic intense commercial or mixed use projects. One that might require full access, larger, more efficient parcels, and or visibility for the right users. Two of the nodes here that we show on the right, first of all, is in red, is the attempt at capturing really the 48th Street node. This is significant industrial and retail commercial development. That retail development plaza, for example, as we toured with Chris, she told us that is 100% occupied. And that's a very good story. The rest of this is majority industrial, some of which is not even in the city, but clearly at the intersection. On the left is a shot of 10th Street today, and we actually pulled off on the bus route, and we spent some time on the southeast corner there of 10th Street in the 10th Street node as we're labeling it. We are certainly not suggesting that, necessarily the same intensity there, so I don't want anybody to get too upset with me putting this slide up. However, good planning would tell you that long-term, providing for the areas that can more readily provide for this type of intensity, larger uses, those users that need the accessibility and require those traffic counts of north, south, and east, west. This Hillsborough sample, and of course 48th, which is labeled there on the right, are those 4 nodes. The next slide, thank you, talks about the third issue, which is really needing to create that substantial buffer treatment that's standard for all properties, no matter the size, no matter the development, to protect the neighborhoods. And about 6 years ago, I think it was explained to us by Chris that this is one of the latest developments by Dollar General. Very nice development, apparently very successful. You can see the buffer in the back, right? And that's either a wall or fencing material, substantial. What it doesn't have either then or certainly not now is a substantial landscape buffer to accompany that fence or wall. And as you see on the right, just a quick shot from a planning exercise where it typically will require landscaping on both sides of that development, of that protection, that buffer, so that the residents aren't looking at the fence and that the commercial development isn't staring at a stark buffer. Lastly, in this quick section, I'd like to talk to you about some of the uses that at least resonate with us. And this clearly doesn't capture everything, but as we talk about creating a new environment, clearly we believe that additional commercial is warranted. Some of the examples we already showed you. Owner-occupied businesses and job creators, and we certainly heard that from the community. Small bay warehouse is not a bad word. These are very nice industrial, smaller buildings that can allow our trades, that can act as both businesses and retailers to be located in an area like this. Additional retail entertainment opportunities, including a drive-through and sit-down food options. Some of also what we heard as desirable last night. We do think there's opportunities for that in the right locations. Additional grocery and convenience, and also medical urgent care. We know more and more, and we hear more and more that our hospital partners, like you all have here in Deerfield, would rather all of us not end up in their ERs, but find ways into standalone urgent care facilities that take the burden off of the hospitals. And then, of course, we all know there's opportunity here for more residential development. Clearly, some infill, low-density, single-family and townhome lots are available. And then on the corridor and in the nodes, opportunity for multifamily. The mixed-use opportunities, including multifamily, would clearly, in our minds, be particularly focused at the nodes as compared to the corridor. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Debbie and we'll keep moving. Thank you.
Okay. And I think our next speaker actually is Eric Liff. You're up.
Yeah, and so to carry on, on some of the obstacles that we've observed and the challenges to redevelopment in the area actually come from land and land ownership. And what I mean by this is, first of all, and kind of Scott alluded to this, some of the parcels in the study area are quite small and irregularly shaped to accommodate development of larger scale. And that's, just a physical constraint. Also, we know that there are many owners in the area that have had their land for generations. And it's important for them to maintain that ownership legacy. But without taking the next step to development, it makes it very difficult to move forward with economic development and kind of keep that process, and progress within the area without that participation. For some property owners, actually, we understand that they are ready to move forward, but existing rules and processes and regulations seem to limit the market readiness of their properties. We have also heard through the public commentary that some of the past actions by either the city and or some of the stakeholders and other property owners has created a notable lack of trust. And we want to convey that needs to be mended. This needs to be a coordinated effort. And lastly, we clearly understand that each person has their own vision, their objectives and motives for their own properties. However, it is critical that more and more, the property owners and the stakeholders in the area try to reach consensus on a vision and potentially work, toward a more collaborative structure to keep this redevelopment process moving ahead and work in unity. I'll hand this over to Al to discuss the solutions.
Great, thank you, Eric, and thank you everyone on the line this evening. So in talking about—
excuse me, Al, next slide, please.
Thank you, Debbie. So in talking about how you can respond to some of the issues that Eric laid out, I think it starts at the top of the community. And when I say city leadership, this is city leadership at all levels, whether it be the political, the community leadership, staff leadership, even those in the community who are those de facto leaders that have been given leadership opportunities by nature of them being intricately involved in what the community has become over the years. And being deliberate and intentional is something that can be communicated about the area in a very open process. I mean, you really want to sell the area. This is the opportunity, once those interventions are introduced, to put on the hard sales pitch. There's an opportunity here for past issues to now become future opportunities. So one of the things that could be done in order to always provide the preservation and the legacy, wealth legacy idea that was mentioned in the earlier slide might be through a community land trust opportunity. Community land trust would allow for residential and commercial development projects to be put into place by combining resources, whether they be residential parcels being combined and gathered through an assemblage, or commercial properties being gathered the same way, being held in common ownership, being held for the purpose of a common development program, and also being developed in a way that's in accordance with all of the rules and the entitlements that the community land trust would provide for that particular project. In addition to that, we talked about building trust in the earlier slide, or that trust has been taken away through the development process over the years. So there's an opportunity here, not only for city leadership to sell the good news, but also to educate. And that education may come at a number of levels. It may come in hosting small business seminars and real estate investment seminars to help educate people about the opportunities that the community can provide through participating in the redevelopment program. One of the specific things that might be done for the next three bullets are some specific tactics or ideas that you may want to consider when engaging the community about how they can participate in the redevelopment process. One of them may be to host a community and city organized event where a developer and a landowner can get together, almost like speed dating or having a matchmaker opportunity. On the front end, the developers can be vetted. Those who want to participate in the development process can also be vetted to make sure that those who come to the table are coming with the right spirit in mind. That is, not wanting to deliver or build projects in the community that the community doesn't want, or that you have folks who come to the table that really are interested in working with the developer, understanding the benefits of a partnership, and at the end of the day, wanting to do something for the betterment of Deerfield Beach. A second idea that the community may want to consider is the design competition for targeted sites. That design competition doesn't have to take on the full embodiment of a large dog and pony show where you're trying to come up with ideas that may never get built in the future, but being very realistic and simplistic about looking at sites that are at targeted locations, i.e. it be for a community grocery store, a community project that benefits the community because it's a recreational amenity, or something that allows the community to move about in terms of a legacy project such as a trail or walking avenue. Those types of opportunities will allow the community to look at the design opportunities, look at ideas, and compare notes, and also be able to ask tangible questions about what it takes for development to be successful. Look at ideas, and if the development community is willing to come in and build a project in the community, they at least have a framework of what success looks like. And the last opportunity as a solution would be to create incentives to assemble properties, particularly at those nodes of development that I believe my committee or panel members mentioned, Juan and Scott, talking about the development nodes along the corridor being really critical and where we see the opportunity for the city of Deerfield Beach to really take advantage of those high traffic corridor and main types of opportunities for incentives to be used to make sure you get the benefit of the best project available to you. So those are my comments, Debbie, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Al. Next, we're going to shift to infrastructure. Aaliyah, you're up.
Thank you, Debbie. Hello, everyone. As Debbie mentioned, I'm the transportation planner and engineer on the team. And so now that we've covered kind of the potential for development facing Dixie Highway, you know, in looking at the existing infrastructure, there are two main categories that are, you know, come to mind in thinking through improving conditions. One is Dixie Highway currently has sidewalks and actually designated bike lanes. However, it's not a very comfortable environment for people to walk, bike, or take transit because of the speeds of the cars and all of that. So in the solutions, you'll see some options for improving that. And then we've heard that there are potentially some parking issues that happen during certain times, for example, on Sundays, that affect the residential neighborhoods surrounding Dixie Highway. And then maybe the potential for added on-street parking or just additional parking in general due to the limited size of the lots as they get developed. And the other overarching, I guess, issue along Dixie Highway is that the unusually high number of detention ponds along Dixie Highway. And as most of you know, it's a DOT-owned roadway, and so are these detention ponds. And from a technical perspective, there are potentially some solutions to kind of at least consolidate these ponds. Next slide, please. So along the lines of what Juan and Debbie mentioned in terms of as you improve the frontage through redevelopment opportunities and the transportation environment, you're also enhancing the quality of life. And that can be done through providing less stressful means to walk, bike, and take transit that can coexist with the needs of people who drive. And so just as an example, you know, the east side of Dixie Highway abuts the FSC Railway, and there are precedents where some communities, like for example in Fort Lauderdale, that have mobilized efforts to plan and implement a multi-use shared path along the railroad tracks. And as you see here, this is a rendering of what it could look like. And we do currently have some of these existing facilities. You know, an option would be basically to move the curb and make a wider sidewalk that both bikes and pets can use and provide that buffer of landscaping and shade to protect from moving cars. Lighting is a key issue. in using this corridor to permeate, cross Dixie Highway and use the multi-use trail, as well as the potential uses that are going to come up along Dixie Highway. Finally, the transit stops that are along Dixie Highway in this section are, very basic, not shaded. And as we continue to improve those amenities, if you go to the next slide, you'll see some examples of what that could look like. A kind of straightforward approach to providing a safer crossing opportunity at transit stops by making the crossing marked and signalized, especially for the stop at corridor, and also providing that pedestrian refuge area, given that it's multi-lane. And the picture in the upper right corner that you see here is an example of how the public realm can be activated. Something simple as providing an artistic structure that serves also as public seating. And from that, it invites the community to gather and enjoy the facilities and the uses that are going to hopefully redevelop along the corridor. And as part of that too, as the different uses densify, as you provide these more convenient and comfortable and safer modes of transportation, the fear of additional vehicular traffic because of redevelopment is alleviated. Next slide, please. And so finally, one of—
Aaliyah, you need to go through these quickly. I'm getting a yank. So
okay.
Okay.
Okay, so just real quick, one of the stops that we made at the tour is the park at Allwood Homes. It was flooded at the time, but there's definitely a huge potential for redeveloping it into this iconic water park that includes a lot of features that, pleases all uses. And then finally, the main point that I wanted to bring across is that as we bring on those warehouse uses and others, there are definitely ways to manage the truck traffic circulating so that it doesn't negatively impact the neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker, Al Battle, and you'll hand off directly to Darwin.
Yes, ma'am, will do. So community relations section of our presentation really speaks to trying to repair or enhance the relationship between the community and the government. And how do you better that? So some of the obstacles that we observed from what we heard last night on the call, and what we talked about throughout the day was that there's been a history of missed opportunities. There's no doubt about that. Additionally, we also heard last night about there's been a lot of time spent on studying this area specifically with the results have not been positive. And the last thing that we also have observed, and we've heard a little bit too, is that there wants to be, or there needs to be, a consensus amongst the residents, city staff, elected officials, and everyone involved about what do we want to do that happens next? How do we get a success story out of this? Next slide. So some things that we thought that may be some things to explore that as possible solutions. So there's definitely an opportunity, we think, for there to be some peer-to-peer property development conversations to occur. There are examples in other cities in South Florida, Broward County and Dade County come to mind, where other communities like Central City, Deerfield Beach have experienced redevelopment. And I'm sure that's what others are looking at when they say, why can't we be like some of those places? And in some cases, property owners, legacy property owners, have been able to participate in the prosperity. That's what we mean by bringing some of those individuals up to Deerfield, or taking individuals to them and talk about what the process was for them to see where there was an opportunity to where opportunity became successful. Another opportunity that we saw in driving around is that there's a tremendous amount of vacant residential properties, particularly up in the Allwood Homes area of the city. But there may be some scattered about the entire area of our focus. Increasing home ownership, we believe, is an opportunity to build on the legacy of the community and bring in new residents, many of which may have been folks who have wanted to come and move back, but for the lack of opportunity have not. And the last one is, in addition to bringing the community closer to opportunity, have a community advisory board in place to be that buffer or be that contact point between city staff and the development community to advise on all issues as it relates to what happens next. I'll turn this over to Darwin Kelly.
Thank you, Al, and good evening, everyone. So, and another solution would be to include the total community engagement, would be to have something that'll empower the youth, the workforce, and the elderly, and also for economic development opportunities. We suggest that we allow for and encourage an incubator space and educational space. And this can look like STEM centers for kids. This could help the residents in the area build work skills and also cultural and entertainment options.
Okay, next slide.
And for our last two solutions, utilize the city-owned land to recognize and celebrate the heritage of the community in the area, because we understand the pride in the community that it has and the history, and we want to help that legacy stand, and also to add a dedicated staff person at a city hall to coordinate and facilitate development with property and business owners. And this person will help create and implement a plan for the neighborhood moving forward. And I will pass it on to Juan.
Perfect.
Thank you. And I've been tasked to speak to you about density, which is a very complicated issue. And I've only got 5 slides and very little time. So essentially what I wanted to show to you, and the panel and I have been looking at this, is there needs to be a little bit of an education on what density is. And there's been some, we need to dispel those notions that density means overcrowding. So there's a difference between building density, that means a lot of density, a lot of buildings in one place, dwelling density, which means how many homes you have in place, and the population density. So those are 3 different things that we need to look into and really make sure that as you calibrate your zoning code, as you introduce new homes, that you do it in a right way and that it's contextual and respectful of the existing character of each neighborhood. So you've got many ways of doing this. Like you see here, you've got the same amount of density, the same amount of houses in different configurations. So again, do it in the right way. Hit next. So I'll give you a few examples of nearby places. Wilton Manors, for instance, this is what it looks like. It's very similar to some of the residential neighborhoods that you have. It's 7 dwelling units an acre. Next. In Portland, for instance, not so close, but you also have single family residential, same type of zoning. You have 14 dwelling units an acre. And finally, in Carver Heights, which is here, you've got 5 to 7 units. That's what's defined in the zoning code. And yet you see in some of these buildings, you've got multifamily. So arguably you've got a lot more density than you actually are zoned for. So you need to look at exactly what exists today and zone for it. Next slide. There's many ways to densify. It doesn't mean that you're going to get towers. You can have what we call the missing middle, or is the respectful sort of middle scale building that could include some multifamily, but again, it's respectful of the single family dwelling units. This kind of what we call gentle density allows you to grow and to evolve the neighborhood in a way that it doesn't take away from the character. So for instance, putting in cottages or what we call ADUs, ancillary dwelling units, in the back of a lot means that you add residential units, you promote rental, new rental units, you can accommodate families and have multi-generational living in a single lot, and you increase basically the quality and equity of residential options within the neighborhoods. But again, you need to do it in a way that it is contextual and respectful of the character areas. And I'll pass this on. Thank you.
We've got Darwin or Alfonso. I'm not sure who starts on this one.
It's me. So
okay.
for the lack of incentives and the funding for redevelopment, the things that we found while listening to everyone, the financial underwriting has not been working because of the lack of flexibility in zoning, and the development is too costly to build. That's actually deterring developers and investors away. And also the delayed timing and regulatory administrative complexities. And this is just dragging out the process and it's making it more costly. And also the lack of unified vision. There's been a lack of consensus for the city and the residents for a plan to move forward. And also there isn't no CRA for the area of Deerfield Beach. And this could help actually pump money back into the area. And lastly, the lack of financing and fundraiser expertise. The residents of the area they don't have the real estate sophistication to piece together real estate deals and raise capital collectively. And I'll pass on to Alfonso.
Alfonso? Did we lose him?
You able to hear me now?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Darwin, and thank you thank you everyone for having us. Really quickly, some of the solutions that we propose in light of the obstacles that Darwin just mentioned, including the upzoning or density bonuses that you've heard from other speakers, fee reductions, whether it be stormwater management or traffic impact fees, things of that nature, and then the expedited permitting and review processes, perhaps pre-application review meetings with staff or others that are part of various approvals. And then advantages of development within the opportunity zone. I know that a big complaint amongst residents and city and elected officials may be that, in fact, the opportunity zone that was selected for this corridor is, in fact, mainly residential in nature, but we still think that there is some potential opportunity for development, no pun intended, on the frontage of the zone. Next slide, please. Additional funding solutions that we think are viable include the Choice Neighborhoods program from HUD. Specifically, we think that the Palms at Deerfield Beach, which is just north of the Hillsborough Boulevard, a property run by the Deerfield Beach Housing Authority, might be a viable candidate for the Choice Neighborhoods Planning Grant Program, which will open up on a new notice of funding availability towards the end of next summer. And eligible activities that can be included within that grant include placemaking and community arts projects, primarily the revitalization of housing, and other things such as gap financing for economic development projects. There's also many EDA grants, Economic Development Administration grants, and then another really well-known HUD program, the Community Development Block Grant, of which the city of Deerfield Beach gets on an annual basis through formula, approximately $700,000 a year, leveraging that through the Section 108 loan program, which would allow up to 5 times the amount of annual allocation of CDBG money for things such as revolving loan funds, and many projects that stimulate economic development. We also acknowledge that potentially a CRA through Broward County might not be feasible, but potentially a city-only or municipal-only tax increment financing or TIF area, and then exploring things such as community development corporations or similarly oriented nonprofit entities that have the capabilities to effectuate a lot of the goals of the residents in partnership or collaboration with the city. And then lastly, GO or general obligation or other revenue bonds to raise funds. And kick it to Debbie.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. At the end of the day, it comes down to a couple of really basic points that we're going to dig in with more detail to what was presented to you today in a report that you'll get in about 2 months. But as you're mulling over what we've presented today, we would ask you to focus on these things. Number one, embrace the different conditions along the corridor. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. You have a very varied corridor, and I think Juan's sketches and Scott's discussion is a good starting point there. Streamlining the regulatory process and create a new zoning district. Your zoning is clearly not working for what wants to come there. That shouldn't, it's such it's one of the easiest things you can do to fix. Sure, it's tough to write a new zoning code. I can see Eric ready to hit me for saying that it's easy, but it's such a vital component. It will also provide that vehicle for community input, community buy-in, creating a greater consensus to a vision, and then everybody has a product where there'll be give and take on all these points, but at the end of the day, there's a product that you can move forward into the future. In terms of working with Broward County, never the easiest thing between the cities and the counties, as we all know, but there are other options that the county is considering other than the traditional CRA. There's been interlocal agreements that have provided for various funding opportunities. We talked about the municipal CRA. If you want more detail on that, Al Battle has an example that was done on 13th Street in the city of Fort Lauderdale just a few years ago, very successful. In terms of establishing a better line of communication, communication is the key to everything, and we all know that in our daily lives. We've given a lot of different ways to create that communication and allow people to really focus on the future. We know that there's a long history here, but this site is ripe. The frustration that the community has expressed and that the city has expressed that brought you to ask ULI to evaluate this area is really indicative of a mutual desire to see this area revitalize and revitalize in the right way so that the existing residents and landowners really profit and can enjoy that new community. So we hope this was helpful to everyone. If you have a question, please either type your questions in the chat room or raise your hand. And it is now it's about 6:35. I think we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes of questions. And Mallory, if you could take us out of the PowerPoint and put us so that we can all kind of look at each other. I think there we go. And again, we hope that to the mayors, members of the city commission who are with us this evening, as well as staff, we hope that you found this material productive and insightful, and we look forward to helping you implement some of these proposals. Mr. Mayor, did you want to speak?
I just wanted to thank all of you very much for your assistance with this. Our experience with ULI has been fantastic, and we cannot thank you enough for being here and all your contributions. An outstanding panel, and it's some great information for us that we can see some low-hanging fruit and we can see what the possibilities are for this corridor. And we really appreciate the partnership we have here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? I don't see any hands.
Gloria has a question. If you can unmute yourself, Gloria.
Okay. Very quickly, let me thank you all for this. It was an exercise that was very well done, and I really thank you all for this. Question is, when you finish your report, will this be available to the citizens as well as to the city leaders?
Yes, definitely. And Chris, you want to talk a little bit about how you'll be disseminating that report?
Thank you. Yes, so the report is due to us, I believe, within 6 weeks. It'll be finalized. And so I would suggest at that time, we actually bring it back to City Commission for we'll distribute it to City Commission for further review. Of course, it'll be posted on the city's website. And obviously one of the recommendations looks like coming down the turnpike is better communication. So if there are members of the community who have ideas about how to get this information out to the community, you know, we're all ears and, you know, willing to work with the community to get the word out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question now from Felicia. If you're able to unmute. Or Sylvia. I'm not sure who's on the line today. Okay. Looks like they are unable to do audio at the moment. You can also type your questions into the chat. Does anybody else have a question, like to raise your hand or type a question into the chat? It looks like Bishop Anthony would like to ask a question.
Reverend Wesley, do you hear me?
I'm gonna yield to my senior Reverend Wesley. Reverend Wesley, you can have my time. I yield to you.
How you doing, Bishop Pelt?
How you doing, sir?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I was able to get on, and this is my first time, you know, listening in on the chat pertaining to Dixie Highway there. I was wondering a while back what happened to the CRA funds. It was supposed to have been specifically for blighted areas, which Dixie Highway is a blighted area, especially on the west side of it.
Our understanding is that there is not currently a CRA covering this area, and in Broward County,
but it once was though, ma'am. Debbie,
I'm sorry.
I say it once was covering the blighted area in the northwest section, the west side of Dixie Highway there.
Pastor Wesley, there's never been a CRA in this area.
So what now?
There's never been a CRA in this area established. There's only been one CRA created in the entire city.
Yeah, but it basically mostly was for blighted areas there.
No. Well, a CRA certainly that's where a CRA would be applied to, but that's not where the city at the time chose to put the CRA.
And we've suggested this evening a number of options that can accomplish that serve a similar role to a CRA without having to. If you're unable to create a CRA because the county has to create new CRAs, there are other ways to work with the county to create a funding source and the type of CRA administration that is needed. So that is part of our report, and we're encouraging that some model for that type of mechanism be created. It doesn't have to be a CRA. There are other ways to accomplish that.
Bishop Pelt, we're going to come to you next. Felicia or Sylvia, looks like they're unmuted, and when I hear a little
the girl told you how to work it.
Go ahead and see if we can get.
If she swing by her tomorrow, she probably get that, make that vibe come back in there.
Okay, 40-year household. We are listening to a conversation.
Okay, that's not working. All right. Sorry, Bishop Pelt, it's your turn now.
Let me just say, I apologize that I was not on last night. Being a preacher, we had a situation that required that I was out. Let me just say that this report has been phenomenal. I would hope that the city would try to find ways to make that CRA or TIF financing work, but I also serve as the chairman of the Housing Authority for Deerfield Beach. And I do want to just share that we are most definitely open to being a public partnership or quasi-partnership with the city. I hope that we've been good faith partners to look at how we can use those CDBG funds and any of the loan vehicles to help develop our city. And so we just want to kind of go on the record. I do have my executive director, Nadine Jarman, on, and to the mayor, to the commissioners, to our district commissioner, when we do sit District 2, Bishop Mr. Ben Preston, we make this pledge to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Octavia that I'm going to read. What is the status of Pioneer Grove proposed project, and how does that affect the Dixie Corridor? First, I was just going to mention that Pioneer Grove was not in our study area, but I don't know if, Chris, you want to mention kind of what, maybe address Octavia's question?
Yes. So the status of Pioneer Grove is that Pioneer Grove is currently in the redevelopment process also. That area has gone through a rezoning effort that Eric Powers Group has undertaken. Pioneer Grove has created a local activity center zoning that's overlaid in that area. Also, that area has received 2,500 additional residential units to spur redevelopment. We're actively marketing the area and talking to developers to work on projects in that area. Because the Pioneer Grove area is a little bit further along in the process and has different needs, of course, in the City Hall area, Pioneer Park area, and those kind of things. Also, because of the industrial kind of nature of that area, it was treated with a different zoning category than Dixie Highway. So this effort that we're undergoing tonight is basically what Pioneer Grove, went through. And as you saw, Octavia, you saw recommendations from the panel relating to redoing or updating the zoning and things like that. So Pioneer Grove is perhaps 2 steps just ahead of where this corridor is today.
We actually had a discussion among our panel members about the relationship of Pioneer Grove to the corridor. And part of that discussion was that every community needs a downtown. And we perceive with City Hall there and then the historic center that you have in Pioneer Grove, that you have the ability to have a downtown there. And then surrounding it, you have these neighborhoods that happen to be adjacent to a corridor. So it gets back to the relationship of the corridor to all of its neighborhoods, including Pioneer Grove, being kind of in a symbiotic relationship, that they all can thrive, but that Pioneer Grove, candidly, is a good start for a downtown. I think there was a follow-up question from Octavia. Did I see?
Yes. What are the different zoning options that were given?
Well, we talked more, whoops, I almost left the meeting. Let me get out of that. Cancel that, boy. We talked about a different structure for the zoning, that it be a form-based code, which means it's actually pictures. It doesn't say setback 5 feet. It shows you what a 5-foot setback in relation to other setbacks in height would be. So it's much more specific rather than just creating an envelope. I'm sure Juan could explain that better than I could.
Well, I can just add, a form-based code basically takes into account the form of buildings in a much simpler way. So both developers and residents understand readily what they expect, right? What they can expect. So it's it's another way of zoning that helps from a predictability standpoint, and also from a resident standpoint to understand, again, what their neighborhood will become.
Thank you. And what it also does, we also talked about that form-based code should incorporate the character areas and nodes that Juan and Scott talked about, so that in each one you'd have, the form is going to be different because that portion of the corridor and this neighborhood is different. So.
I believe, Chris, you had your hand up.
Yes, my hand is actually raised on behalf of Felicia and Sylvia Poitier, who are having problems getting through. Felicia texted me asking, actually going back early in the presentation, she's asking about why the Dixie Corridor west boundary for redevelopment shifted from Southwest First Terrace over to Southwest 2nd Avenue and Southwest 3rd Avenue. I think that relates to when you were talking about considering the neighborhoods as contributing to the corridor. If you could maybe explain those boundaries a little bit.
Well, we didn't really extend the study area. What we said is that you have to view the study area in context. And that context is those other neighborhoods. So there is a relationship there, but it clearly wasn't just part of our study area. I think we talked a little bit in the Alwood neighborhood that it's an infill opportunity, and the types and densities that you could get there, which Juan was talking about. But basically, it's where we think the real sensitivity has to come, where the commercial meets the residential, and how you're going to deal with it, whether that's a transition or a buffer, but it has to have some kind of sensitive treatment.
We have a question from Gwen Clark Reed. If you're able to unmute yourself, please. There you go.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this two-night workshop on the Dixie Corridor, but I'm concerned about the zoning. When you're saying that, it depends upon what you're going to put on that property, what the zoning will be. How will, you know, who's going to determine that? Who's going to determine what the zoning will be in each part of that corridor? What type of zoning is needed, because it backs up to the residential.
Yeah, it's not, Gwen, this is Debbie. It's not that specific kind of site specific zoning. It's actually much broader, so that you might rezone the entire study area to a category that then has sections within it that relate to the narrow corridor, which is heavily commercial, the nodes, which could be more mixed use. So it would really be more larger pod areas that would have a similar character versus a site specific, each block gets zoned a different piece. It would have to be a comprehensive rezoning so that all the pieces fit together.
I have a follow-up.
Gwen, just a second. Juan, did you want to comment on what I said?
I wanted to also clarify for all the residents what we're not proposing one zoning change that will take care of the corridor. And you're absolutely right, Debbie. I mean, let me just take it a little further. It is very different to provide a zoning category on the intersection between, let's say, 10 and Dixie than those properties that are immediately abutting a residential home. So there needs to be a more holistic approach to zoning that considers the protection of those homes where they need to be protected. And it also encourages development in those areas that don't affect the residential so much, and that are great opportunities for you know, additional or the revitalization of the corridor. But one size does not fit all. And that was our point tonight.
Gwen, did you have a follow-up?
Yes. Well, he basically answered my question. That as you know, as along the corridor, you're going to have maybe from 10th Street to 15th, you'll have a different zoning than from Hillsborough to 10th Street. So are you saying that it will be based on what the developer wants to put in there, or is it going to be based on what the zoning is for that area?
We've said we think this is something that should be done comprehensively, that all the stakeholders, property owners, residents, development interests, the city needs to come to the table and deal with this collectively to create an appropriate zoning that facilitates the revitalization, because clearly what's there today isn't doing it. We're just saying, as you do that, here are the points we would suggest you be sensitive to.
And just one last thing, Debbie. The municipal CRA, how can we get more information on that?
Al, you want to respond to that?
Sure, Ms. Clark-Reed, Al Battle, City of Fort Lauderdale. I have all of the founding documents, all of the documents that talk about the interlocal agreement between us and Broward County that I can provide to Chris on city staff to distribute to everyone included, if that's okay with you.
Thank you.
I think that'd be great.
I have a comment in the chat that I can read for you. This is Cheyenne Stubbs. I am president of DHNG, Dixie Highway Neighborhood Group. We are a group of property owners along the Dixie Corridor. We organized in 2015 in an effort to get property owners together for redevelopment. We had several meetings over the past few years. I have been listening to these meetings, and I must say I am impressed with your findings and summaries. I think they are spot on. I'm excited and encouraged and look forward to meeting with my group to discuss this. Thank you. Great.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stubbs. Anybody else? Hi. Anyone else? Dwayne, did you want to comment?
No, I just say I'm also encouraged. I appreciate the opportunity, And, you know, everything that I've heard from my clients as to why deals have not gone through have been addressed in your proposal. So I'm looking forward to the report, and then also working with the city administration, commissioners and staff to hopefully draft some new zoning code that would support all the things that you've laid out. So this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have probably about 2 more minutes. We could take one more question, comment.
Reverend Wesley.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, presently, isn't Dixie Highway zoned for commercial and residential?
It's mostly commercial. Juan, who wants to respond to this?
I think the city is the most knowledgeable.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But there's a
Chris,
variety of zoning designations.
It's got scattered zoning categories. Chris or Eric?
So it's scattered zoning, isn't it?
It's just not a very cohesive zoning category, and it doesn't allow, we think, the flexibility as to the uses that could be established here. So that's why we recommend that you do a comprehensive rezoning of the area.
Okay. If you want, I can answer the question.
Is that Eric?
Yeah, it's Eric Power, Director of Planning Development Services. Good evening. So the property north of Hillsborough Boulevard on the west side of Dixie Highway is a mix of B1, and then it becomes, you know, single family residential RS5.
That's what I understood. Okay.
Right. The area that is between Dixie is on Dixie Highway, south of Hillsborough, just south of 15th, is zoned DBR, which stands for Dixie Business Residential, which, as you stated, is a mix of business and residential uses. Okay. And then everything south of that to Sample Road, which is the city property line, is actually zoned County B3. It still holds the county designation, and the city is looking to amend or change that zoning in the future to make it a city zoning.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah,
thank you.
Because you're looking at mixed use then.
So there's a couple of other designations in the corridor. There's a commercial area. There's also a, I believe it's a, I'm looking it up here, but there's a limited manufacturing and industrial area. And then the corridor also has a certain depth. So in the back of it, abutting the residential, there's also some lining zoning. So the corridor is quite varied. And again, our findings, our discussions amongst the panelists were with regard to how does that play with the single family that's behind, and can we propose a new zoning, or can we encourage the type of development that goes there? And to answer directly your question, whether it's mixed use or not, how would that be? How would that play with the residential? And is there market appetite to build mixed use on the corridor, which is also important because you can zone to whatever you want, but if there's no market for it, nobody's going to build it.
Right. Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any last questions? I think
like we have Commissioner Preston, and that's probably all that we have time for, if that's okay. I know you have a hearing to get to, Debbie, at 7. The fun doesn't stop today, Debbie.
No. Commissioner Preston, please, you're our last speaker, our closer tonight. You're on mute.
Thank you, Debbie.
I
would like to thank all of you for coming out tonight and all of your comments. It is so important that these conversations be held, so that out of it perhaps can come a vision, and with that vision, it can be turned into a reality. You know, I was particularly, you know, encouraged when I saw the funding options and some of the points of some of the things that I said last night, something that resembles a CRA, and all of the options that were presented tonight must be thoroughly explored to see what would fit and what would help. But I would also say that the panel came forward with multiple considerations as it relates to area revitalization. But let's keep in mind too, as we come with all of these wonderful ideas, that you have to get buy-in from the community. And other than that, you will get what is called area or that place district hostility. And what we don't want is that hostility. What we'd like to have is constant engagement with a lot of ideas as they come forward, so that the community will have an idea of exactly what it is that you want to do. Other than that, there will be a hostility. Now, if the community buys into it, the residential community buy into it, you'll get the one key component that we need, and that is area support. And once the community is supporting it, it's going to thrive and it's going to create additional opportunities as well. And so this was very beneficial for a lot of reasons. I just want everyone to know that my colleagues, we have discussed this at length about what we need to do. And I want to tell you that they were very inspirational in bringing this forward so that we could, you know, begin to explore these things and not just give it some, you know, conversation, that we can actually begin to build a plan. I'm very, very happy with what the city has done as it relates to this, because for far too long, this particular area have just sat and not contributed. There are a lot more positive that were not talked about. And that being is you will see so many of the social services start to go down. Employment will be increased. There are just so many pluses that if we can do something that is positive. So again, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for your contribution. And thank you, Debbie, for, you know, bringing forth all these wonderful speakers. A very good job.
Well, thank you. And on behalf of ULI, we appreciate the opportunity to work with you. Your staff has been tremendously helpful in providing us with the information we needed to do our jobs. And that's always the starting point. So to our panel, thank you. 2 days of hard work. We'll have that celebration dinner sometime soon, we all hope. And with that, I think we'll say good night, and everyone have a happy holiday and stay safe. Thank you all.
Same to you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.